in while we run through the housekeeping. And again, it's going to work much better if we have participation. And so first of all, welcome. We're going to have more people joining over the next few minutes, but thanks for being here. And this session is being live streamed, and we're going to keep inviting you to raise your hand on Zoom. There should be a button somewhere with a hand. Raise your hand and we'll pop you in as panelists, which means we can hear you and we can see you. If you only want to be heard, we can also do that. And if you want to, you can add your organization to your Zoom name. That way other people know where you're from. I'm doing that to myself right now. Some of you might want to be associated to the organizations you work at. Others might not. It's optional. But we invite you to add your name, your organization name to Zoom. And we're going to run about 90 minutes. And we're going to do a round of introductions between those in the room. And then we're going to have two distinct roundtable conversations on, oh, see, Joseph, I'm popping you in as a panelist. Then we're going to have two rounds of conversations with specific themes. And we'll explain those in a minute. And then we'll wrap up, hopefully, 90 minutes from now. And we are from Envisioning, and we're going to explain what the company is in a minute. But first and foremost, my name is Michelle. I'm founder of Envisioning. And with me is Galdina, who's going to join in a second, but also Arthur, who's our head of product and who's joining us from Berlin. Do you want to say a few words?
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me well, I hope? Just saying hi. It's my first participation of the day. Yeah, I'm the head of product at Envisioning, joined the company long time ago as well. And I'm from Brazil, originally from the north, and I currently live in Berlin, Germany. So, hi.
Very well. And we have a few other Envisioners in the attendees as well. And this would be a good time to raise your hands and be part of the conversation. So I'm going to keep insisting a little bit more. It's nice having Joseph here on the panel, but do chime in, raise your hand, and we'll allow you to talk. That way you can be heard. And again, the purpose of this session is to be a roundtable. So we want to hear about all of your experience in scouting technology. We're going to talk about our experience in a minute. But this is really about you guys. So Joseph, do you want to tell us where you're at? And we've primed the question of if there's a technology that changed your life in any way. But if you want to go first, set the example for the others.
Sure. Yeah, hi, Joseph, either one works. I'm based in London. Physically, I work in Oxford professionally, but during the pandemic, I got locked down in London, so that's where I am now. My university in Oxford is called Oxford Brookes. And I work in something called the Ethical AI Institute there, which is a kind of a new institute. But I also work on a project called the Peeragogy Project, and that's what kind of led me to join this. This thing, Peeragogy, is an international peer learning thing. And if I get a chance to say more about it, we worked on a paper together for the journal Futures. And so I got to know a little bit about this community and this way of thinking through working on that paper. And so we've been working together for like 8 years. And I suppose on that basis, one technology that's changed my life as a programmer and as a collaborator is probably Git. I remember the days before Git, we had different ways of sharing files. So Git makes collaboration with people around the globe very easy, and it's kind of a landmark, I think, in that regard.
That would be Linus Torvalds' other big invention after Linux.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
So I'm realizing we have a shy crowd. So what I've done is, since there are very few hands, I've also invited each and every one of you to speak as an attendee. So you don't have to show your face. That's okay. But you're now allowed to speak. So you get to mute and unmute yourselves. And it would be nice to hear from others who you are, how you find yourselves here, and if there's technologies that have changed your life so far.
I think I would definitely chime in with something going back in the days, and I remember like as a kid being quite marveled by seeing and using a computer for the first time. That's definitely, I think, one of the big techs that really put a different path in my life from, I don't know, 24 years ago or 20 years ago. So for sure.
The personal computer.
Yep.
Hello, my name is Stefan. I will present myself. I'm living currently in the Netherlands, and I am a designer and also a speculative designer. So that's why I was also interested into this event about scouting technologies. I am a freelancer, so I'm not attached to any organization right now. And one technology that was that actually changed my life, I could say, I will go low key. It will be the book, actually.
Nice. I see Heather and Divana who are unmuted. Do you want to chime in as well?
Sure, I can't, Heather can. I can't, sorry, get my camera working now, but I'm from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. My name's Heather Galbraith. I work for the city of Calgary. And when you mentioned technology, I thought of the bicycle right away, and just having some freedom and access through childhood and adulthood. But of course, that was around before I was born. So in terms of changing my life, I'm having a hard time thinking something other than the digital platform, and being able to have these conversations collaboratively over multiple time zones as being a really significant change that we're experiencing now. Thank you.
Oops, I was muted. Thanks, Heather. I'm going to set you as a panelist, if that's okay. That way you can enable your camera and we can see more of you. I see Diego as well. I'm going to add you guys as panelists. Divanahu, do you want to tell us? I also have Diego.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So hi again, Cal. Devanshu again from India, freelance industrial designer. To mention one technology that changed my life, I think it would be the timepiece. So I was very young when I first saw a broken timepiece, and I was amazed to see how minimal it looks on the outside, but there's like more than 500 parts on the inside, and the entire functionality. So if you know, it takes like a second or 2 seconds to charge a timepiece, a manual one, and it lasts for like 2 to 3 days. So it's really about investing that energy at a very slow rate, so that something lasts that long of a time. So that my life, and to an extent that I ended up taking mechanical engineering as a subject, and I went into engineering devices, consumer electronics for almost, let's say, the next 7 to 8 years. So yes, that was one of the technologies.
Thank you. Diego?
Yeah, of course. Hello, guys. How are you? I'm from Mexico City. I am the founder of a company that is called Bind Innovation and Foresight Bureau, which is pretty much, like a company that help big companies in Mexico and Latin America to just follow the path of foresight and corporate innovation. So that's pretty much my role. I'm happy to be here and to know you all, guys. And maybe, can you hear me there, guys?
Yes, we can, Diego.
Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry, so I see you a little bit frizzy. So one technology that changed my life, maybe this is so simple, but maybe the Thermomix, this like iPad Pro for cook, like that changed my life entirely. It's like amazing. So I don't need to cook anymore. So it's that simple. And I think that those kind of innovations that are very, very, very simple also can make huge changes in in our daily basis, you know. So that's it.
Awesome, thank you. Hey, Alex, nice to see you.
Hi. So yeah, I'm based in Scotland and very, very new to the Envisioning team this week. So it's a real pleasure to be here. The technology that changed my life, well, I'm kind of going to jump on what Arthur said earlier about the personal computer and kind of add to that about the internet. I live in the middle of absolutely nowhere, very rural Scotland, and just connection and the internet allows me to kind of be able to work. Like, it's my dream to be able to work wherever I want. And I chose chilly, wet, windy Scotland, my beloved home country. So that has changed my life, where I don't have to be tied to a city or an office. I can work where I want. So that has completely changed my life.
Nice. You found the right place, hopefully. So first of all, if you want to be part of the panel, raise your hand for those joining us now. And we're going to move on with the actual roundtable bit of the conversation. And again, you're all you've now all in the webinar settings. You're now all allowed to speak. You're on mute by default, but you can unmute your microphone, and we're going to move on with what we've proposed as sort of the theme for the day. But first of all, I'm going to tell you briefly about Envisioning and why we're doing this. So when UNESCO reached out, or when we heard that UNESCO was organizing the Futures Literacy Summit, we felt this was a good opportunity to come out in force and show sort of the world what we've been up to. Because in many ways, we've been trying to push a similar agenda, albeit in a much smaller capacity for a while, which is to say we've been trying to make people more literate about technology and its implications. We've been working on building an open platform or a public utility of technology intelligence for a while. We do this by building visualization tools and narratives and workshops and training methods. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to get more people to understand the implications of technology and to see how much is actually out there. We're global and virtual and decentralized by default, and which is why it's relatively easy to sort of pop in people from around the world and work together and regardless of location. In other words, we try embracing technology at the core early on. And our work revolves around tracking and making sense of technology. We do this by scouting, which is to say identifying technologies. We assess them, so we determine how ready they are, how fast they're moving, and then we try visualizing these results. There will be deep dives on our methodologies tomorrow in a separate session. We'll post a link in the chat. This is not it today. This is really a roundtable where we want to hear about your way of tracking technology. And the purpose of the talk is to look at challenges, opportunities, and methods around identifying technologies. So for us, this is our bread and butter. This is how we spend our days. But we also realize that this might be true for more people. So we really want to hear from you guys what this experience has been like. So the theme of the first set of conversation is about sources. So where do you find technologies? How do you identify trends? How do you make sense of what's going on? How do you know what's reliable and what isn't? So we're setting this up as a conversational topic, and we really want to hear Diego, Joseph, or Alex. If you want to get the ball rolling, and anyone else in the attendees list, raise your digital hand. We'll get you in as a panelist to speak as well. So sources, how do you find technologies? How do you know what to look for?
I'll go for it, Joseph.
I'm happy to go first again. So partly I came to the event just to do a little bit of self-promotion, and since you said links in the chat, I'll put a link to a paper that we just sent to this Futures Journal there, so you might be interested in that. It was linked with the Anticipation Conference, and I came along to the morning session. I think Palak was there calling in from Oslo, so she helped organize that. And this was in 2019 when it was still safe to go to physical conferences. But the paper talks about participatory futures and how to design future activities for participation. I would say that a very natural place to look for leads is through your network or through a network. And in this case, I'm very proud of the first page of this paper because I was the last author. I brought these people together. I guess that was kind of my role to bring them together, but I was very busy with some other things, and they did a lot of the heavy lifting of actually writing the paper. So a network, if you properly maintain it and work together with people, can be great. And the nice thing also about this network is it's, spanning 3 continents. So similar to this activity here, I think is spanning at least 3 by last count. And so that's exciting to work with people from around the world who have very different viewpoints. So yeah, I could leave it there. I think that's a theme that's come up a lot in the discussions that I was in this morning as well. But yeah, maybe one of the questions is not just how to find the leads, but how to work them and stitch them together into something that's meaningful. And that's probably much harder and a bigger topic of discussion.
Thank you.
I could follow Joseph's comments because I was really thinking about participation in people and having a wide degree of perspectives inform what we know or what we think we might be curious about with the future. I'm in an organization with 15,000 people. We deliver multiple services and to citizens. We have partner agencies and organizations, and no one person can know what the future holds that's relevant to all of that. So it's having those participatory, inclusive discussions to allow for diversity of perspectives that is really key in our city. Thank you.
And how do you ensure that diversity in the scouting? Can you speak to that?
Well, one way we formalized it, and I intend to do this more, is by having a scan club and having a mix of participants who we know are curious and want to explore the future and are kind of front runners in that work, and then balancing that with ensuring that we do have representation across our city and filling in the gaps so that we have that. So we have a group now of kind of 30 to 40 individuals who come together on a semi-regular basis to have discussions, and then have also put in an open invitation so that if we want to have, for example, a theme scan related to businesses to discuss the future of small businesses in Calgary, or the future of our downtown, or the future of remote work, that we can do that with people who work outside of our agency as well. And I think I saw, might have been a question in the chat about what is a scan club. For us, it's a group that comes together to, by scan, I mean, look into the environment at, anything from media sources, scholarly journals, news articles, Twitter, social media, to understand what might be changing, look for evidence of the future today, and then to have a discussion about it. What does that mean for us if it holds true or becomes wider spread? And we call it a club because it is a little bit, we want to be less formal, a little bit relaxed, and allow people to have, really exploratory conversations about it.
Diego, do you want to add something?
Yeah, of course. So on my side, it's more like, I have a close network of collaborators that I've been working with in the corporate ecosystem. So every time that we want to take a look at what's happening in the world in terms of technology and foresight and all this kind of stuff, we tend to go and visit the venture capital world. Where are they investing? What are they doing? What are the weak and hard signals that the venture capitalist in North America and Latin America are start looking and deep dive on those technologies, So there's actually a tool for that it's called CV Insights. I'm going to write it down right now on the chat, which tells you a little bit more. It's like a platform where you can go and it works with AI and tells you a little bit more, like the context of where are investing the venture capitals in all the world, in what type of companies, what are the verticals that this company have. So I think it's a very interesting tool, So that's one of my main sources of digging deep into the ecosystem, and as well as different sources like PSFK, which is an innovation blog which tells you a little bit more of what's happening in some industries around emergent technologies and innovation in that sense, So that's it, That's pretty much like the sources that I use, and obviously a set of networks and communities, via LinkedIn, via Telegram, via different type of networks to just maintain and connect with different experts and see what are they doing in their different and specific topics. So I think it's that.
Excellent.
I'll chime in as well. Although mine feel very like personal interest, I suppose, up until very recently. And I also feel very millennial about this and also I'm a writer, so I read a lot and I write. So I can end up down a rabbit hole of just blogs and like really far through almost any kind of reading material, academic or on social media, or just kind of anything in between. So I have an alert set up on FeedSpot, so that kind of scans what's been published online, but there's it covers a range of my interests. So tick some boxes to see what I want to be updated on, and it'll just send me through an email digest of what's been published online, and so that's kind of an email alert, email digest. And I have other interests kind of from an academic background and an environmental consulting background. So network is really important to me. So just kind of keeping tabs with people, networking, and just keeping up to date and hearing things, and then just kind of exploring that, seeing where it goes. And I guess the third thing for me is a little bit of personal investment interest as well. So like keeping up to date with what's going on in finance. So that can be a really interesting place. It's mainly from an environmental perspective that I come from, and that I'm interested in. But wherever there's investments, kind of opportunities or areas of development, I find that a really interesting place to get information on innovation.
And those email lists, do you maintain? So is it a keyword search that you've set up? Do you look for specific words? How does that work?
It's something that I set up a while ago, so I would have to go back and check. But honestly, there's anything from like yoga and mindfulness on one side, like right through to like the kind of, I think environmental, might be a bit of engineering, and yeah, so it's like I think it's tick boxes that you tick, and I should untick some. Just a personal note to myself.
I think I would add a bit on that. I think the question regarding the sources of technology and what are the key technologies of sources that you're looking for. For me, there's a big constant balance where I'm trying to filter out what I think it's a lot of noise, where you have a lot of, I would say, hard technological development where you can be keeping up with white papers, or like you can read specific publications such as Y Combinator, or like even see something that's more close to Silicon Valley where you're looking like Product Hunt, where you're seeing just recent releases of those things. And I always separate those as, I would say, as tools, because usually when you see a development of technology, they are just a new set of tools that should enable you to do something new. But you always have to connect. And I think this is the interesting part that really brought me to this whole thing with envisioning, is to understand exactly like actually what are the human needs that are driving these tools, because they are reflex of some needs that we want to develop or we want to achieve, and the cross connections between those, because maybe at some point when somebody was developing a given technology, they're just actively focusing on one specific way, and this is what is pushing the drive of technology. But when you combine that tool with a different need or just placing it in a different context, that's when things, for me, I think, get really interesting. So I'm quite actively like trying to balance and look those two things together.
And I suppose seeing the underlying needs helps understand what might actually work. Blockchain comes to mind, which is to say, does it actually address any underlying needs in a way that existing technologies don't, is arguable, and it depends a lot on the context and the application. But it's a good example of something that is easily hyped without changing the underlying needs, or without addressing the underlying needs better than existing technologies. And I'm leveraging this from a question by Ben, who asks, how do we distinguish between hype and true technological progress? Which is also preempting the next part of the roundtable, which is how we assess technologies and how we sort of separate science fiction from science fact. But if anyone wants to speak to that, so distinguishing between hype and true technological progress, how do you guys do it? How do you know what works and what doesn't?
I think I would have one question that's related to this whole team, but it's also, I'm curious about some of the answers that people gave and that some of them wrote as well. I always wonder, and I think, I don't remember if it was Douglas Adams that gave this quote, or it's the thing about the 30s and 30s years, like something that it was there when you were born, you just take it for granted, not as a technology. Like maybe we don't see sewage or like electricity as a given technology, but I'm 34 right now, and then I see a computer as the main technology that came to my life that really triggered those things. So I would really like to understand from you, what is the fine line that defines, okay, from this moment on, or this thing is a technology and this thing is not a technology as well.
I posted the quote in the chat, but I think it's nice to hear how other people define technology. I think Alan Kay says technology is anything invented after you were born, and Douglas Adams has a more extended version, which is when you turn 30. But yeah, how do you know what a technology is? I mean, that can turn fuzzy really quickly.
It's a much broader answer, but our mentor, Howard Rheingold, who brought together the Pedagogy project, also works for a place called the Institute for the Future. And he's quite keen on this theme called crap detection. Crap, like, yeah, you mentioned sewage. So how do you detect, basically the question is, how do you detect what's good for you and what's not? And so it comes from this quote from Hemingway about being a writer, actually. So this relates to Alex, might be an interesting person to talk about that. But as a writer, Hemingway says you quickly learn to have an automatic filter for what's good for you and what nurtures you and stuff like that. So if you begin to suspect that something's hype, probably you should trust your intuition. I don't know if that helps operationalize it, but I guess maybe it does broaden it out from just future trends and technologies to other things that are nurturing for you, or that seem like they will be. Yeah.
I wonder about this, Joseph, when you mean about your gut feeling, also connecting to, she lost the video, but when we were talking about the inclusion of different perspectives, also like what might sound hyped for you might be something that's a very big value of or need for someone else, depending on the different perspectives and usages. So this is a good like point of discussion, and where do you establish that?
It is a good question. It occurs to me about the other example. Someone was mentioning in the first go round about the technologies that change their life, and the there was a whole cluster of them: the internet, communication platforms, all this kind of stuff. And I think we have to recognize it's changed people's lives, both for good, like being able to work from home, but sometimes also for bad, in the sense that, you know, propaganda spreads more quickly and people have maybe lost the, another example is like in the old days, people used to just tune into one of 2 or 3 news channels. Now everyone tunes into their own personalized news feed, and you can easily get lost in your own bubble without being able to check and assess things through public discourse. So I guess that's one example, though. It's like to just look at historically, how did people do it? So if we went back to the 50s had their problems as well, but things were maybe simpler then, or at least people like to think they were. And so, you know, anyway, I could babble about this a lot, but what would be a technology that would make the internet act and feel like 1950s television? I don't know what that would be. Yeah,
well, I'm going to reframe the question, which is there anything after the internet? Because in so many ways, what the internet has done is it's incorporated everything that came before it, starting with hypertext, but eventually video, audio, voice. I mean, everything is swallowed by the internet in so many ways. And AR and VR just seem to be the next phase of that. So is there a technology that comes after the internet, or is the internet simply it?
I mean, I think the internet's just the latest that we've gotten to sharing knowledge. Like, I think if you look and getting the example of the books, or like, let's see, before we had a written text or like the printing press or whatever, like the way you'd share knowledge was from generations to generations or from person to person, like the guy that went to the next village and then sang songs about what had happened in their big city or whatever. With the advent of the printing press, then this was a lot easier to share. And now I think with the internet, we've reached our capabilities at the moment of bandwidth that we can do with that. I think following, and then that's the lovely piece of text by Tim Urban, not Tim Urban, Wait But Why, the blog. I can find the link in a second. That is doing a good depth analysis on the Neuralink that's being developed by Elon Musk, where he's addressing the whole communication of the whole problem, framing the whole problem that we've had with in terms of bandwidth. Like even right now, we're just simplifying everything to a common ground. I'm Brazilian, I speak Portuguese as my mother tongue, and we're all here like agreeing to talk in English, and we're just we're simplifying as much as we can to a common ground that we all can understand each other. And I think the internet became this place, and like English became this powerful language as well, also connected to this, is dominating the internet in just general sense. But I think the next level would be to break a bit of this barrier of the limitation of bandwidth, that we are able to communicate and to access knowledge. If there's something next, I will probably bet on that.
Hi, Sylvain.
Hi, Michel. Sylvain from Luxembourg. Listening to the conversation, there a few thoughts that come up to my mind, like technology always has been value neutral in itself. So it always depends on what humans are going to do with that technology that they discover. And you just have to think about the wheel. You know, it can be used to better build houses and to transport the stones, but it can also be used to build tanks and other kinds of war machines. So, and that's basically true for every kind of technology that mankind has invented in a way. So it's always us, it's not the technology. And the thing, what is different is that today everything is exponential, and definitely we kind of lose control. We don't really understand what's going on in every corner anymore, probably not only in technology, in pure technology, but also in biotechnology and stuff like that. And that makes the thing a little bit more difficult, a little bit weirder. Usually technology is there to help humans, so to automate tasks that haven't been automated before, so that we can free some time to grow and do different stuff. Well, that's basically the driver for technology in a very simplistic way. And so, but under these conditions of exponentiality of today and very complex technologies, etc., with a lot of interactions with the society and politics and etc. I think that ethics of technology becomes more important than the technology itself. So the thing that we have to deal with is the ethics of the technologies more than with the technology itself, because otherwise it becomes probably a little bit too too big for us. That was my thought. So Joseph, where you're working is the place to be in that sense.
Do you think, I was wondering, connecting to that, Sylvain, that you're mentioning that technology has become more and more exponential, etc. I've been reading about some questions that throughout times, up to a certain point, we had a lot of the big developments of big technologies, the internet or like mobile data, etc., that were controlled by the government or governmental agencies. And now with more and more of the venture capital, like the last 20, 30 years with Silicon Valley as well, like this is moving way forward to more like a private interest industries in that sense. And you have the government that is kind of lagging behind on being able to regulate and to put like correct measures on the development of certain technologies, as you can see what happened in the last 4 or 5 years with Facebook and etc. So what is our role as an individual with that sense? So like, how do we bridge this discussion? What can we do?
Yeah, well, as I said, the intertwinedness between technology and sociology and politics and psychology has grown in a way, you know. So before things were a little bit more separate, and we also were able to deal with those things in a more separate way. But today they are all linked. That's simply the trend of the evolution. I think that this trend anyway was written well before, so that's how we are. We accumulate knowledge and invent new technologies based on what we already know, and just try to find the next thing that is another revolution and makes other things easier and more automated and stuff like that. I think that must be something that is biologically in us, you know, this being driven by that. Again, the thing is like we are in the exponential phase in our evolution as far as technology is concerned, but not only as far as technology is concerned, also concerning climate change, but also concerning many other things. So you just have to look at how long we didn't have cars and how fast we have a lot of cars. You just have to look at the growth of the population. We were 2 billion in 1800 or 1 billion, I don't know. And 1500, we were 500 million. You know, now we're approaching 8 billion, etc. So everything, we are in an exponential loop. And this is not only technology, this is like kind of everything. And we probably don't really realize what is going on, because our mind is not really made for following exponentiality. We talk a lot about it these days, but we don't feel it. We don't have a real feeling for it, you know. There is this simple illustration, you know, when you make 35 paths and each path is double the distance of the preceding one. What is the distance that you have behind you after this 35 paths? Because this is exponentiality. So normally there is no figure that comes up to your mind immediately. Like, what could it be? You know, and in fact, it's 35 times around the world. So and that's the reason why we can't really represent exponentiality in our minds. But we are in the midst of it, and that's quite a challenge. So that also should somehow inform the way that we're talking about technology at this moment in time.
So given that
it was not a complete answer to your question, but that's how it is. When I start talking, I improvise. And
I was going to say, given that ethics is such a strong current and obviously a necessity, how do you know? I mean, who's in charge? This can get very philosophical very quickly, but how do you determine who should be in charge of the ethics of technology? I mean, there is the Institute for Ethics in Emerging Technology, and they do their bit.
but we are all in charge. You know, the future can only work when we are all in charge, and not some people that we delegate and should do it for us. We know that these things don't work anymore in the future, and I think gatherings like this, creating this kind of networks, like in the Future Literacy Summit, that's the way to do it. You know, all those people involved have to talk together and come up to something, and because I don't think that it can work anymore by somebody deciding that this is now the ethics for everybody else. That's the old way of doing, and we might go towards such a model of governance in the future, because we all feel that we are in a kind of a liminal moment right now. So already before the pandemic, but even more now in the pandemic. And I even think that the success of the Future Literacy Summit is partly also due to the situation that we have been thrown in quite radically by a exogenous shock that we don't master, and which is complex and chaotic and everything. We are talking about in theory about complexity management, and now all of a sudden it happened. I think that these things come all together, you know, and so this liminal moment, which comes from anthropology and says that it's a moment where old rituals and rites are gone, but the new ones haven't not yet been defined. So, and kind of feels like we are in such a moment, and because we have been talking about many of the things, again, already before the pandemic, be it our economic system, be it this and that, and then technology. And now in the pandemic, we see that everything is linked, you know. So technology is linked with public health. The pandemic is linked with poverty and all those things, you know. We see complexity. We're in the midst of complexity. It becomes so much apparent to us more than ever. And technology is one part in this new consciousness, you know, and it has to be also considered in an ethical way, I think, but in the whole, not only as technology, because this is too commercial. And so, I'm an entrepreneur, I have a nice new technology, I'm going to make some business with it. So that's why I like the idea of the crap. You know, so, and because in these times of exponentiality, crap is also exponential.
I think there's a Twitter account called the Internet of Crap. It's a good reminder of all the IoT things we don't need. But so a question popping up here in the chat is how we get corporations to be ethical. I mean, is there such a thing as voting with our wallet? And simply not using Google and Facebook and Amazon? To what extent is that feasible? Choosing alternatives, is that something you guys do?
I think that's it's so funny, like, because connecting also with what Sylvain was talking about, I think it comes, of course, in terms of politics. We were not doing politics with the internet on the usage of the internet, because we were not aware of the consequences or the power that it could have. And I think a big awakening for this was talk about the social media, what's happening with the elections and how we're able to manipulate the public opinion, etc. This was the rise of like a big awakening for us, I think, generally in a society to talk about this. And I think this voting with the wallet, or like deciding what to do and what to change, is still quite a complicated infrastructure to shift right now. I remember like considering like if you would replace all the services that, for instance, Google is offering, like let's say Gmail, and then you have Google Maps, and then you have a Google Calendar, blah, blah. If you were replacing all those things that are given for you for free, like as you are the product in that sense, you would have a bill of like 50, 60, 70 euros a month to be able to use something that is of quality. So I think there's not only the individual that has to have this role, but also the government should definitely have big regulations in the sense of what is being offered by those. I think the GDPR is such a good movement in that direction of the right of usage for the data from the consumers and etc. Joseph?
So I was thinking, oh, it's impossible. There's no way it's impossible. Michelle's asked the impossible question, but then I thought, actually, but there are certain instances where I do that, actually. So it's not a matter of distinctively choosing not to use Google, but it's distinctively choosing to do something else. So I think I pay personally, the numbers you mentioned, Arthur, brought to mind, that I pay, I think, maybe $40 a month or something to pay for certain rented Linux-based servers. So yes, we talked about Git, but yeah, I'm a user of the other Torvalds related technologies and a bunch of other open source things. So I think that's an important answer, which I've been mulling over, and it relates to this issue of the social, the we, and everyone should be involved and stuff like that. I think that we shouldn't forget that since like the mid 80s, there's been this view of what is ethics and technology, and being free, libre, open source software is an answer. So, you've got everyone from Richard Stallman, who does refuse to use anything that's not that. So he's proved that it is humanly possible to not use any non-free software, to people who are much more opportunistic. I would suppose I would include myself, that I use this web server and other things to do things that I simply can't do using Google technologies. And I think that, I've been lucky enough to get some education in programming and computer science and stuff like that. So I know how to use them to a certain degree. But one of the comments that my friends and I have been kicking around is like, just open source free software maybe isn't enough, because if I was to say to someone on this call who's never been a programmer before, oh, sure, look, here's all the open source, go ahead, have fun, you can install it on their own server. First of all, they probably would never call me back. And then secondly, nothing would happen, obviously. So I think that we need to think about what goes beyond open source software and free software, but not just throw the baby out with the bathwater. So what would be other kinds of cultural production methods that we could use to build, let's call them literacies. Maybe software literacy is an example of a future literacy.
Yeah, I think also the question you're mentioning, like a part of the problem when we're talking about the software, but carrying on with your example of having something that's open source. Of course, there are like amazing projects that are open source that we all use, but then you also have what about the infrastructure necessary for that to run? And then you're comparing something that it's okay, the software is free as well, which is really good, but who's hosting the servers? Who's hosting you need an online connection for something to happen. You're probably paying like for Amazon instance, and then you're paying for Amazon as well. Like, what is the alternative in that sense?
So in my case, it's I have some Amazon credits which someone very kindly gave me, but my thing is hosted on a different company. But a more interesting, I guess, than is like, yeah. So are we sort of just reinventing communism without Marx or something here? Because I guess if we were to say like, what's the other alternative? One where we all get some kind of share of controlling it and stuff like that. It sounds very communistic to me. So I'm just aware of an example, which is Ecuador tried to do something called the Free Libre Open Knowledge Society a few years back. And I don't know how well that worked, but that was an initiative of the Ecuadorian government. I don't know that it went to anyone's satisfaction, but I did contribute a brief about open and free learning support. So you'd have to probably reimagine a whole society. So it's kudos to Ecuador for trying. And I know that France, for example, has some initiatives around open source, and they've done the budget there. I think Brazil at one time had done this exercise as well, and Iceland maybe, and so forth. So different countries are moving from the government level on that agenda, but I don't think, for example, I don't think the US is, where these big international companies are based. And so I don't know that we should sit around waiting for governments to solve the problem. Yeah.
I maybe like to add an idea about an element that I think comes into play and that we probably don't consider enough in the whole discussion about technology and the ethics about technology. And it also has become somehow apparent, maybe as a weak signal during the pandemic, and how in the different ways that Asian countries and our countries are dealing and managing with that pandemic. So, well, on the one side, our very developed countries have more trouble in managing the pandemic than other countries, which is quite interesting. And on the other side, you have the Asian countries. I'm not necessarily talking about China, because they're going so far with their social credit system and their complete surveillance that I wouldn't support that. But if you look at countries like South Korea or Japan, Hong Kong and Singapore, for example, what happened there? In Japan, people started to wear masks even before the government told them that they would have to do it, because that's the social pressure for the common good that is so strong that it wouldn't have been possible anymore for Japanese. As soon as there was something in the news about this virus in China, not to go on the streets with a mask. So compare that to the trouble we might have with all those people that don't want to wear masks or wear them in the right manner. South Korea, on the other side, they have an app, a tracing app. The tracing app even knows where you got infected, well, where the other infected guy was. Not like the European ones where you only have the information that you got infected, but they don't store where. So there's no real tracing there. There's only the signal that, and they have to have that app. And again, nobody dares not to have that app. And if they get tested positive, they have to download the quarantine app, and they are controlled by GPS from the health administration that they stay at home and not move, because we also know that one of two people in quarantine at least go out once, because it's so difficult to be in quarantine. And then again, this is spreading the virus. And why do they do that and accept that? Because they have social trust in their own society, and they have social trust in their government. If you look, for example, at South Korea. So that makes them much stronger. So it's the trust that makes them stronger. It's the trust that they have, the different type of trust, which of course is a result of a different type of culture, which is less individualistic, a little bit more collectivistic, although maybe in China there are also counter-revolutions to that. But again, that's where they come from. And we are at the peak of individualism and freedom and defending freedom, and nobody can, et cetera, et cetera. So we are in a completely different cultural mood in dealing with the things that happen to us. So the same thing is with technology. So we think that everything is a threat, and we have to find ways to get rid of every single threat. That's because there is no trust in the system. So instead of building 100,000 alternative systems, which cost a lot of money and which is not a lean way of solving problems because it adds friction to the system, we should try and understand and to work on reestablishing trust. And everything will be easier in a way. And also for managing complexity, or the complex world, because what happened with the pandemic will happen in different ways in the next 10, 20 years, be it through climate change or another pandemic or whatever kind of strange things we all feel and know that this is the pace, you know. So I think this social trust in connection with what you do with technology is very important, and you can't just consider technology alone without considering the cultural situation of the community. Yeah. Well, sorry for.
Well, I like where this conversation is going, and I also want to suggest that we can try priming the discussion around assessment as well. So I think, we're touching on several topics that are adjacent to technology foresight, and of course we're getting to the nitty gritty really quickly, which is a good sign that that this is engaging. And we would also like to suggest that let's look at the assessment layer. So we've talked a little bit about identifying the technologies, seeing them as they happen, but how do we separate that which matters from that which doesn't? So internally, we do a lot of quantitative assessment. We look at technology readiness levels, for example, TRL, constantly and over time. But also, I think there are other ways of discerning that which is ready from that which isn't? Like, how do you develop that sensibility, I think, is the topic of the second half of the conversation. Does that make sense?
So, I mean, I think that the question that I have is what is ready or not? I don't think anything is ready. I think where do we establish the line with that? What do we consider ready for this discussion?
And ready for what, right? I mean, it's so contextual and application based.
I mean, I think given the frame of technologies, I think also my rationale behind the way I approach technology has kind of been, and I'm sorry for this comparison, but it's been quite established with in the framework of games, where you have skills and you're developing, and from then on you're enabling new things to happen. And I'm always connecting then back to what I first said about the needs of someone else. And then we're talking about the advent. Let's think about electricity, for instance. Is it ready? Yes, but it still needs to change quite a lot. Also because the way that we're producing it, or the way they're massively adopted, it's damaging our planet. Like it's damaging the environment. And then we're looking forward for new ways to change with this and so forth. So I don't know if something is ready. That's my point with that.
Could I just make another connection to the world of software? One of the famous idioms of open source software is release early, release often. That things should be ready, but ready for what? So you're not necessarily releasing this thing and then installing it on everybody's machines. What you're releasing are things that people can test out in a safe environment. I had an interesting experience the other day where I've been working with people on another new paper. And we've all been in these discussions all since we started at a workshop, and we moved that on. We have a Slack, we have some other sessions on Jitsi, we were talking and stuff like that. And then I tried to share the ideas with someone else who hadn't been in those discussions for a while. And she said, what the heck is going on? All these half-baked ideas. And every time I talk to you about this paper, everything's changed. And like, she thought and she thought, and I think she was correct, she was being a friendly critic, a critical friend. And I think that was actually very helpful to get that feedback. But it's very different from the conversation with people who had been there from the very beginning. So I think also it has to be ready for what, right? So, you know, if I'm ready to make a remark to you all, it's because we've got to know each other now over a few minutes today. But if I was to go up to someone at the pub who didn't know me and didn't have that shared background and talk to them about, you know, my attitudes about something, or ask them about their attitudes about something, one could imagine it wouldn't go quite so well without a little bit of, you know, getting to know each other, right? So we have to consider ready for what. Anyway, long comment to make a short point.
What were the other questions, Michelle?
I'm finding them for us. While I look for them, if anyone else wants to join the panel, raise your digital hand on Zoom and we'll get you in on the screen. And also everyone can unmute themselves if they want to chime in without showing up. The other questions were how you distinguish science fiction from science fact other than TRL. So we talk a lot about sci-fi, where many of us are sci-fi geeks and we use it as a source of technology scouting. But there's no definitive line between imagination and reality. All of reality begins as imagination and then it progresses over time. So making that distinction is not non-obvious. Are there any ways that you guys do it? Does anyone have any top tips on how to know what's real from what isn't? Is it never really real? It's all in our heads.
You know, I'm thinking with the distinction between science fiction and science fact is, does it behave, or is it possible to operate given our limitations of the physical world that we're living in, or the given technologies that we are aware of, is this feasibly possible, or is this still in the imagination sense? Like, is teletransportation of a human being or of an animal possible nowadays? Science fiction. I think it's a. I think that the diffusion of the technology, and then sometimes with that sentence of like the future is already here, it's just badly distributed. I think it's a different thing when we're talking about technologies that are already present, but they're like in such an early state development, or they've been proven that they might work, but they're still super expensive to be applicable for a given mass, or etc. I think that's a different context. But the science fiction or science fact, for me, it's a very clear-cut answer in that sense of it's feasible or not.
Stefan, do you have any experience as a speculative designer? And then
I do actually follow the comment of Arthur about is it feasible or not, but in the same time I feel like in every technology in a way there is always a kind of narrative that goes beyond what the technology can do in the present, for instance. So Silva mentioned like that we are in exponential times, for instance. So it implies also that the technology that we have today might evolve and also will do much more than we can also imagine now, or we can already imagine. So in a sense, I guess it's blurry. I mean, it depends about the context. Like sometimes if it's about thinking in practical terms and making a business out of a technology, yes, I think we will be thinking about science facts. But if it's about thinking about creating a new technology, or like for instance, if we're thinking about VR, for instance, in the end of last century, who would think that it could do what we are able to do nowadays? So I think the line can become blurry at some point.
I think so too. They are very blurry. I think that it's a very fluid frontier or continuum between science fiction and science fact. Because as we know, many things from science fiction have become reality as a science fact later on. And for me, it's like science fiction is when the inventor is still imagining the thing that he is wanting to invent, and then comes the moment where he is able to invent it. So in a way, it's a necessary moment in the life cycle of the emergence of every new technology that then becomes a science fact. That's the way I would say I see science fiction and science facts. Again, because a lot of things that have been written in science fiction have been done, become reality. And you know, it will go very fast now, because what we are living now we are learning socially to collaborate and work on a very, very global scale remotely. But this is old technology. You know, we're sitting in front of a screen with a microphone and headphones and whatsoever. In 10, 15 years, we will have holographic technology in every place where we're living, and we don't need the interface anymore. So we need just our eyes and our fingers, and we interact with the whole possibility of the computers and remote collaboration without the friction of any interface anymore. And this will go very, very quickly, because we are in these exponential times, and we all feel it and see it, that those things are going very quickly at this moment in time. So 15 years is a very long moment, and I think in 15 years we will have that, and that again will change a lot, because we don't have the tangible interface anymore to that technology. So it will become even more immersive and even more difficult to be separated from ourselves, even in our thoughts, and the way we're feeling. I think this will come. Yeah, and this is science fiction, but already also a little bit of science fact, at least in laboratories.
I think the question, Sylvain, it's not about it whether it is as a definition, but it's at this moment, is this science fiction or a science fact?
Yeah,
Like in
if
5 years from now, anything that we might judge as a science fiction now might have been, if it's super accelerated, might be reality or not. So it's always like there should be you should look that with time and just keep measuring that.
if you look at from that perspective, I'm sorry, I stop immediately. I agree with you, but it also depends on whether it makes that sense just to judge it at one moment in time. For what reason? So doesn't it have to be looked at in a kind of time frame in a way? Well, but sorry, Alex, you.
Oh,
no,
this
it was
is a great.
I was going to make it, Alex or Heather. Go
sorry.
ahead.
Oh, okay, this is a great discussion. My first thought when the question was raised was does it matter? Because I think of, we're trying to change perspectives to think about moving away from strong logic and, being able to kind of project an understanding of the future that is likely to be true from understanding that there's multiple plausible futures, that maybe our assumptions that, inform kind of our strong logic models may be weak. And it's really a matter of thinking differently about the future. So kind of the nugget of truth is almost less important than the story that there's multiple truths or there's multiple possibilities.
But I think it's, Heather, regarding that, I wonder, like, if we're talking about technology, in a way it manifests. And I think you have the device where you have the concept that it needs to be manifested in our reality. And I think this whole discussion of, well, if it's science fiction or if it's a fact, I think it goes first in terms of like the possibilities of the reality that we're living through. And I think that's just a line that extends, like something that it starts as a science fiction, then moves, and somebody's driving this. This is not happening by itself, but acknowledging that this is not feasible at the moment might give me challenges enough to, okay, so what do I have to do? Like, how can I develop this, or how can I push this into becoming a reality? Like breaking down that and figuring out, okay, so going back to the horrible example of the teletransportation, why is it feasible at the moment? Like, okay, what are the laws of physics that I have to start to bend? Will I be ever achieve that? I think that's just this progression of line. But I think it's interesting, of course, to understand, like, if it's a science fiction, if it is a reality or not.
Can I just say one thing I wanted to jump in on was one that's kind of a current example that might be a not intuitive one, but I think it creates a whole other set of discussions, is climate change. So there's a lot of talk about how climate change, I don't know, 99 out of 100 scientists agree that it's human caused and it's here and it's a real and present danger. But yet you get certain politicians saying, oh, but we don't really know, and maybe it'll go back, and maybe it's not that big of a deal, and maybe it wasn't caused by humans. So effectively, they're treating climate change as if it was science fiction, right? They're looking at science fiction as if it could be easily kind of wished away or dreamed away, the same way as someone else, as I might think about teleportation. Oh, was that a real thing? No, it was just a daydream. But I think that's a problem, and I think that the other aspect of this conversation, thinking about technology, that makes it much more complicated, is nature. And I think that we might expect anything that we could dream up to come to fruition technologically, but I think that has to be added, like all else equal, or everything else set aside, it will happen eventually. But we don't really know where 15 years is going to put us from the point of view of nature. So I think the concerning thing to my mind, which is maybe science fiction and maybe science fact and maybe a nice blend of the two, is nature has to be thought of together with technology now, and making everything very complicated, from the climate to biotechnology of humans. And I don't think it's a very original thought that I'm sharing, but it does complicate things. Like, if we were to look at this nice image of Arthur with his guitar and his television and the paintings behind, we can't and the lamp and stuff like that, we can't think of nature in the same kind of way in terms of objects or even media. It's much more complicated than our normal modes of thinking about technology. So I'm concerned that we might need completely new ways to think about something that's kind of post-technological in order to grapple with some of the difficulties that we're going to face.
Yeah, on that point, Joseph, there's a great network of technology thinkers based in the Netherlands called Next Nature Network, if I'm not mistaken, Triple N, and they're exploring exactly that. I mean, part of their vision is that technology becomes nature, and or second nature, and that there is no fine line. And earlier today we had during a conversation about methods, we realized there's no good definition of what technology even is. It gets very fuzzy quickly. And I think what these guys are doing is they're establishing that there's a gradient between what we create and what is nature, and that there's at no point is it one or the other. For example, we cannot eat raw food anymore. I mean, most of humans can no longer eat raw food because we've been cooking our food for so long. And of course, there's ways and ways of eating raw food, but effectively our stomachs have become other or different because of how we've been treating our food for so many millennia. And it's an example of technology literally changing our bodies.
I would love to invite Stefan and Sabine to the chat or video, because there's happening like almost like a heated discussion on the chat. That's like a separate thread. And this something caught my attention, like when we're talking about things like low tech or low tech and high tech. I would really like to understand what is the perception of like what is a low tech or a high tech? Because are we talking about digital things, for instance? Is this?
Well, I don't know about Sabine, but personally, I would say that low tech, for instance, are technology that are very low on capital. For instance, is an investment or needs. When you think of high tech, you think directly of something that you could see in a science fiction movie, for instance. Whether low tech, you could think of a book, for instance. If the internet is a high tech version of a book, the book is a low tech version. So I think that's what we were thinking about, but maybe Sabine can jump in and talk.
I wonder the question if this is also related just to a time, no? Like to this moment that might sound like something that is, I'll try to reframe it. Maybe I would say not low or high, but like old or new, emerging or established.
Yeah.
Technology. I think just because at some point, like I'm gonna push the ball just to extremely make my argument. Fire at some point was such a crazy technology that was very new and really changed our lives, connecting to what Michelle mentioned about not being able to eat raw food anymore, etc. Like I think this is the point of observation that we put into like what is low tech or high tech. Like for instance, we don't take electricity as a high tech anymore, but at some point it was quite groundbreaking. Two extremes offer for same technology innovations. So this is Cecile definition. Oh, technology. I think we're more on that path. Okay.
I mean, one definition I don't have a good definition, but I have a definition for high versus low tech, which is generally around how much infrastructure you need to use it. So fire is generally low tech, whereas a smartphone is a high tech, because a smartphone requires a network of infrastructure to be manufactured, to be usable, the networks, the electricity behind it. So that's I would put that at the higher end, whereas making your own fire or even cooking your own food as an extension of that would be lower, because of the complexity needed to pull it off. But again, this is not an academic definition.
What about electricity nowadays? Like, okay, you can have your tiny solar panel and then you're independent, but the whole infrastructure that needs for you to provide electricity at the moment, it's such a complex network that we barely know of its complexity. Like we just turn a switch and we just take it for granted, but we cannot say that that's low technology.
And who made the panel? So you get stuck in that. You get stuck in the network pretty quickly, and we can't.
I think that the discussion that I would love to bring and I'd love to challenge, at least, and this is a point that I'm trying to make, being a bit annoying with that, is that the sense of new and old or like high or low, it's just a very interesting relevance. So I think I would look more on the way and the consequences that we can bring and the choices that we have to make while using a given technology, every tool has its trade-offs. Like, I think it's a matter of understanding what can what do we want to take from those tools or not. Johnny Mnemonic.
How many megabytes were uploaded in Johnny Mnemonic? It wasn't even gigs, was it?
Yeah, it's not the world's best movie, but it's a nice, they have this difference between the low techs and the high techs is kind of dramatized in the movie, because in that movie, high technology, whatever that is, also causes an illness, the black shakes that people get from using too much internet. And I've been thinking about that sometimes in the case of Zoom fatigue and so forth, that maybe we should look at, the ways in which we have to adopt and adapt technology as part of the infrastructure, right? So our adaptations to using fire are not so much, but our own physical adaptations to using things like Zoom or whatever are kind of expansive. And that leads to the weird situation that as technologies become more and more advanced, they could make less demands on us in certain ways. You could get nanobots that go in our blood stream, and that you don't even really have to think about it. The nanobots then take care of everything. Even though it's quite high tech, it doesn't require very much user interaction or user thinking about things. So that's a bit of a strange, weird example, getting high tech things which are actually low tech. I think there's a lot of science fiction dealing with, bioengineered cities and this kind of stuff, right?
Do you think our circadian rhythm is engineered, Arthur?
I think it's been influenced, of course, by technology. And that's okay, it's the Instagram, social media, this platforms, going back to the way we were talking about. Of course, it's making changes to our physiognomy, to the way we think, the way we can pay attention to things. But every single technology has been doing that. If you look at the historical movement, you can say that the advent of fire was what allowed us to have a calorie surplus, and that's how we developed bigger brains. Everything has changes, and that's the discussion that I think I've read it, I think, and one of the other panels we were having, the invention of time, I think, was a big problem. If you look at that, maybe it was one of the key technologies that started also making us shift quite a bit. Time was not present. Yeah.
Just going back to the high tech, low tech. I've got a bit of a vested interest in self-sufficiency, and so I kind of think of high tech and low tech as, can I do this myself? Does this kind of add to my ability to be self-sufficient, or does it increase my reliance on technology and reduce my ability to be self-sufficient? So that's kind of one of my ways of looking at it, and it kind of ties into the some of the discussion that we've had around the climate change and the ability of the world to kind of support our global populations. And I think that where I kind of come from on this, or my standpoint, is that one of the big, depending on what the value is, depends on the drivers for technology. So a lot of the drivers have been economic growth, and so we've been going in that direction, and we've taken the kind of world to a point where we're living beyond our means, and we're going to have to start dealing with the consequences of that. And technologies, we're very focused on the adaptations and in that vein. Whereas if we can, kind of going way back to some of the discussion on cultural values, and if we can shift some of those values, maybe the trajectory of technology and everything would change depending on. It depends on the value, I guess, on what the value that underpins it. And I see some of the issues that we have with technology come from this dependency on growth. we're all kind of addicted to it, and convenience and growth kind of, they go together, because convenience facilitates, you can grow faster if things are more convenient. But I personally, my personal opinion is that that's not a sustainable way to live, and so technology is like at the risk of being unsustainable. Like our growth is unsustainable. So there's a lot to that, but I think that some of the key parts, how to address this, it comes to communication, and how we are communicating. Because I kept coming back through this discussion, and most of the time for the past half an hour I've had a massive alarm going off in our building, so I didn't want to unmute myself. But this idea of perspectives and which perspective we're in or coming from, because with the science fiction element, this could all be science fiction to someone who's got no idea about technology at all. This is all completely off the wall kind of stuff that we're talking about. I know if my mum was sitting in this conversation, she would, her mind would just be all over the place. And so it's a bit of, I think it's called the personal incredulity fallacy. I can't comprehend it, so it can't possibly be happening. That's how I see science fiction. And I love, is it Albert Einstein that says, if you either view the world as everything is a miracle or everything's not a miracle. And I see science fiction a bit like that, a bit of a miracle. And why not? I like the creativity, I like the unknown, I like the surprise element of what technology is capable of. But you have to have an open mind in order to appreciate that there's things that you can't possibly comprehend going on right now and coming, in order to kind of be open to that. And that's a communication thing. We have to be educating and communicating and talking. And that's why I love this summit so much, is because it opens doors in my mind, and opens networks where we can discuss these things. So that's all I had to say.
I really enjoyed the comparison that you made. Sorry, Michelle, go for it.
I was just cheering on her argument.
I like to entertain myself with this idea of the natural evolution of society as the path of a human being. At first we're marveled by these new possibilities and we just splurge on it. Okay, candy, wow, this is amazing, this is delicious, I'm gonna take it all. And this really works when 14, 15, 18, and then you come to your 30s, 40s, and you're like, oh, maybe that's not, it has some fearsome consequences that I haven't thought of it. And then you're starting to face those issues with that. And I think that's the call for everyone to have more responsibility with the usage of the technology, but for them to have that, they need to understand it first.
Yeah, and if I might to add, Alex, what you just said about the perspectives and also, this continuum between science fiction and science facts. So there is this famous quote by this famous science fiction author, which I don't remember the name right now, who said, the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed, and that's exactly what is
Gibson.
happening. Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what is happening, and that exactly also describes the situation or the scenario that you just described, Alex. Then, if your mother or anybody else's mother would sit here and listen to this conversation, then she definitely would think that she is in science fiction, whereas we think we are in science facts. So, and that already illustrates how important the perspective is. So the underlying, culture, value systems, knowledge, whatsoever. And also, yes, this idea that definitely the future is already here, and which is also an interesting quote for the Futures Literacy Summit. So there are some of these futures that are already there, but not yet known by everybody. And they also might not all survive, but so things are quite interesting in that sense.
So that also leads to the comment I was gonna say about that. I think, Alex, everyone appreciated what you said there. I was going to mention the issue of first contact. So I guess by definition, anyone being on this call would have to have a laptop, know how to use Zoom and all this kind of stuff. But could you imagine, you don't have any of these technologies and someone comes on ships to your land with all these technologies and guns and different, viruses and stuff that you've never encountered before. Well, we don't need to imagine that because that's already happened all across the world. So I think that I'm a little concerned, maybe just thinking that the whole notion of science fiction and science fact assumes some things. And I think maybe one could reframe this in terms of cultural contact stories and thinking about how for us as well, maybe we can be in situations of cultural contact with some of these unevenly distributed futures. I mean, I can't imagine really what's going on inside of the labs at Google and Facebook, right? So, these companies that I view as a user, what's going on inside behind the scenes. My sister works at Amazon and she's not allowed to talk with even her husband about what she's doing. It's like she works at Bletchley Park or something. So, it's interesting to think about the cultural contact situations that we might be in with respect to that Gibson quote. Anyway.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking that if our mothers would consider this as science fiction, then there is a high probability that there are things out there that we even would consider as science fiction, but that others already consider as science facts because they are already elsewhere. So we're not knowledgeable about everything, even if we talk about it. This might go into the other direction as well, and not only into the direction we just took as an example.
Well, if we want to be wrapping up, that's an option. I know this has been a fruitful conversation, and I'm really, I guess I'm thankful that we went this far into the philosophy and asking these hard questions about technology. It's nice that we always end up at the deep end in a way. Ariel raised the question, perhaps someone wants to have some parting thoughts on this, about how we can sort of dissociate the financial incentives from technological development. And given how VC and given how technology is financed nowadays, it's no longer really a public investment, but it's been heavily privatized. Perhaps that's challenging. I think Mariana Mazzucato speaks a lot about how technology is truly a public good, as in, like, if you take the smartphone and take the pieces that led up to it, take the GPS, the touchscreen, even the internet, all of those were public investments, mostly by DARPA, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And so technology is fundamentally a public development, but the benefits are private. Whether there's a way out of that or not, I'll leave on the table.
I would also follow up on that and saying that it's politics, and that's that example that you were mentioning about they were public, they were governmentally funded, and then the recent developments that we have of technology are of course building on top of every single previous technology that we've had, but also the development of the labs are being mostly funded by private enterprises, and that's driven by profit, not driven by the common and better wealth of people. Like, they don't care about it. We launched the newest unicorn and sell it. What is the most profitable right now? And then that's it. It's politics.
That's true within the existing system, the existing socioeconomic and existing capitalistic system. And these are also systems that might change in the future. In a limited moment, many things can happen. They're not like done in stone neither, those systems. So maybe things can change there as well, and that will redirect also technology. There are these ideas because technology will kill so many jobs and is already doing so. And how do you want to teach all those people the high-end skills needed to operate these complex machines instead? We already all at the limits of what we can digest on an everyday basis, even that we are very open and very curious and very educated and very interested. Maybe that doesn't really work, and we will need a rent from robots. Everybody has a robot in industry, and that's the guy who is paying at least the unconditional basic income or something like that, you know. If the capital from human labor is going into machine capital, and human labor is less and less earning, apart from those that are programming the machines and managing the teams or whatsoever, because what else is there? And all the others will have very, very low wages, and all the other jobs will go away. So all those things are linked. So technology is, again, not existing and evolving in a air-free room. It is completely intertwined with everything, with culture, with economics, with social peace, with whatever you want. You name it, it's in there. And yes, so these ideas about how to benefit from robotization and automation, to make everybody benefit, because they won't all become IA programmers, those that will lose their jobs. So we can forget about that. That's not the solution.
So just one quick comment, I think that kind of fits with this, is that these things have inside of them also rare earths and stuff like that. So they don't just depend on financial capital. I think a useful theory that might help break down that answer would be the multiple capitals theory. So we could say, well, there's only a certain amount of rare earths we can get at, and that producing smartphones doesn't just depend on previous innovations, but all kinds of resource flows. At this point, it's interesting to think about technology being both a kind of cure and a curse, in the sense that cure is, how do we keep track of all of these resource flows? Well, of course, we're going to need some technology to keep track of all the resource flows and to make people aware of the costs and benefits. But why do we have to do that? We have to keep track of all the resource flows because the technology itself out in the world is creating all these problems, environmental, social, and stuff like that, that if we're not aware of them, we're going to run off a cliff of one form or another. So that seems like an interesting case to me of the technology changing a lot. And yeah, it's not yet written in stone, but maybe it's written in some cases it may be written in silicon chips after all, because technology contains a lot of these things already. But anyway, I would be in favor of wrapping it up because I noticed myself babbling, but I wanted to also make a little request. I think it's been such a illuminating chat. I wondered if maybe people would drop their email addresses or something in the chat so that we could follow up. That would be fun.
It was definitely a pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys, for showing up. This is, again, highly experimental for us, and but it's a way for us to sort of leave our four walls and try bringing some of this thinking out to broader audience, and it would not have been possible without you guys. So thank you so much. You can all save the chat transcript. I would kind of recommend that. I think that's the best way to keep track of everything that was said. So in Zoom, hit the three button, the button with the three dots, and select Save Chat. And that way you also get a copy of everyone's email address. And we'll be following up. I mean, we're trialing a bunch of things at the summit. We're hosting a bunch more sessions as well later today and tomorrow. So stay in the loop, do show up, and let's keep this conversation going. We hope to be nudging the future of technology in a more fruitful direction. So thank you so much.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
See you around. Ciao.
Bye.